Everyone, and welcome. My name is Edward Joseph with Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this special event with the Belgrade Center for Security Policy and the Kosovar Center for Security Studies. Hello to everyone here. Good morning here in the East Coast of the US, and good afternoon to those who are in Serbia and Kosovo and the wider region. This event is quite timely. Serbia and Kosovo continue in the EU-led dialogue, which actually continues this week, as a matter of fact. And EU Special Envoy Miroslav Lajčák has said that a comprehensive normalization agreement is possible within a matter of months. Now, we know what officials think, and we know what media outlets and commentators have to say about that. But what do the citizens of Serbia and Kosovo think? How do they approach this topic? So that's the focus of this event. Normally, many of these surveys are conducted by outside organizations, including American organizations. In this case, this is the product, this research and these surveys that are being presented and discussed today are the product of a leading think tank in Serbia and a leading think tank in Kosovo. So they're the ones who designed the questions, conducted the survey, and analyzed the results. And what's interesting is, of course, we have both. We have, in these parallel surveys, we have the views of both Serbian citizens and Kosovar citizens. So we can compare and analyze the views of public opinion in both countries. On today's event, of course, we're very pleased to have you along with us. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function, and I will be pleased to monitor that and ask as many of those questions as I can. We have two panels today. The first panel focusing on Serbia and Kosovo, that is public opinion in each country about Serbia and Kosovo. And the second panel will be on foreign relations and influence of international actors. And that panel, that second panel, we're going to just do a quick break after an hour and then restart right into that second panel. Now let me quickly note a few points of context here before I introduce the heads of these two leading think tanks for you. First, let's quickly take a note that COVID-19 continues to take its toll in the Balkans as it does here in the United States. That's something we're thinking about as we focus on these political issues. Second, the past continues to hover over the present. President Hashim Thaçi of Kosovo resigned last month to face war crimes charges at the Specialist Chambers in The Hague. Also last month, a mass grave was discovered with quite some difficulty in Serbia containing the bodies of Albanian victims. There's been a lot of democratic backsliding in the region, particularly in Serbia. You've seen as Freedom House has said that, declared that Serbia is now a hybrid regime. We here in the United States have a greater appreciation for just how fragile and precious democratic institutions are after the recent and ongoing experience we face here in the US. And finally, there is, of course, continuing mass out-migration from Serbia and Kosovo and the region, high levels of corruption, high levels of unemployment, and rising ethno tensions in and between some countries, including after the Washington Agreement between Serbia and Kosovo, we saw some quite harsh rhetoric from Belgrade that produced acrimony in Kosovo and between the two countries, even after that agreement in September. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce the heads of these two leading think tanks. First, I'm going to introduce Igor Bandovic, and Igor has been Igor's engagement with civil society goes back to 1997 when he established Libergraf, a non-governmental organization that works on public education, the promotion of human rights, and civic activism. He's been actively engaged since then, authoring reports and holding senior positions in organizations like the Europe Fund for the Balkans. And I note Igor's particular experience when it comes to public surveys. He managed the Gallup Balkan Monitor in 2009, 2011 in partnership with Gallup Europe. So please, Igor, welcome, and you have the floor.
Ed, it is a great pleasure to be at least virtually at the SAIS and be part of this event. I really want to thank you and your team for setting this up. I think it's a joint endeavor between us and our partners in Kosovo, and we really appreciate to have the opportunity to present the results on this really, really interesting and I think timely survey. You portrayed really, really well context that we are having at the moment. I would add to that only two things, really. Why we are talking about this now? Because it seems that all other options are exhausted. There were a lot of discussions on Kosovo and Serbia, and practically the dialogue lasts for 11 years. But during these years, I think public opinion and really what citizens think was, at least in Serbia, neglected. There were a lot of options and there were a lot of approaches which were tried, some democratic and some more less democratic, but and some feasible and some less feasible. But when it comes to the what we are having now, I think that the voice of the people has to be heard. And I think this survey and presentations of our researchers brought from Kosovo and Serbia will tell you really how confused our citizens about the policies which our governments or our negotiators are leading when it comes to the dialogue. I will not go further into discussing the context because you will see all that really before your eyes when our researchers start presenting. But what I really want to emphasize is that I think it is finally time for the democratic principles, rule of law, and human rights to be tied with the discussion on Kosovo and Serbia. And this is, for us, very important. We have had a lot of, I think, bad experiences in the Balkans when we were trying to do the deals with the strongmen which didn't last it long or they were not sustainable. I think at one point in time, we have to really take these lessons and start discussing openly about the issues together, governments and the people jointly. And finally, I want to say that for us, it is really very much appreciated to work with our long-time partner, KCSS, Kosovo Center for Security Studies, and our cooperation is really symbolically sign of how we can do things together. Thank you very much and enjoy the conversation.
Igor, thank you very much for that. And quickly note that the EU, in its recent statement about building transatlantic partnership after the US presidential election, warmly and strongly endorsed and embraced President-elect Joe Biden's proposal for a summit of democracies. So I thought that was interesting that this got a fulsome embrace from Brussels. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the director of the Kosovar Center for Security Studies, Mentor Vrajolli. And Mentor has been with KCSS since 2008. He has led a number of significant studies, including the Kosovo Security Sector Barometer Program. He also represented KCSS in the USIP Global Initiative on Countering Violent Extremism. Mentor brings a breadth of advocacy and research experience, including as a consultant to international organizations on issues ranging from rule of law to the security sector. Mentor, please.
Dear all, dear Joseph, thank you very much on behalf of KCSS for bringing together this very diversified audience here. As some of you might know, Kosovo Center for Security, this is one of the leading think tanks in Kosovo and the Western Balkans, which is particularly focused on the security-related issues. We are happy here to be at this event with our partners from Serbia, Belgrade Center for Security Policy. Together with BCSP, we have been part of a joint regional consortium for almost 12 years now, a tradition of partnering which dates back in 2009. This way, we are delighted to proceed the normalization and partnership of think tanks from both countries, thereby contributing on second track diplomacy. As you know, we are gathered here to discuss very interesting topics, foreign policy and dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. Our colleagues from KCSS and BCSP will be presenting data from Western Balkan Security Barometer survey, which we together with BCSP conduct for the first time. However, the survey is part of earlier tradition of KCSS, which is built through Kosovo Security Barometer, implemented for 9 consecutive years. We have built our capacities and created a brand thanks to a continuous support of National Endowment for Democracy there in DC, which we remain very grateful. The goal has been to use it as a citizens' recorded voices and actively advocate on increasing and the accountability of the case security and justice institutions in our countries. Having in mind the majority issues, this majority success for almost decades of measuring public perception through KCSS, KCSS is in conjunction with NET, came to the conclusion that security barometer can expand into regional level and serve as useful tool for democratization in the region. Of course, having in mind the state of play between our countries here, it is natural that we decide to go with conducting the first edition of survey in Kosovo and Serbia, but we hope for further countries to be added in the upcoming editions. You already mentioned some of the key issues related to these topics in Kosovo. As Igor mentioned, you have depicted also quite well the context here in Kosovo. I would only go on to briefly mention some of the key topics which are hanged as a result of the lack of normalization between Kosovo and Serbia, which are related to the foreign policies. One of the key issues that Kosovo have struggled over the past years have been the inability to join some of the key international organizations, such as the UN membership due to the veto of Russia and China, lack of contractual relation with NATO, which comes also due to the veto for non-recognizing NATO members, difficulties with the EU integration process, again, due to the 5 non-recognizing members of EU, and also the fact that the dialogue have gone to the locking path, and the fact that the dialogue have not provided the necessary result. We consider this as a major obstacle for both countries, resulting in Kosovo on a frozen conflict, while in also when it comes to Serbia, resulting on blocking its path towards EU. I don't want to go into detail of the findings, although there are very interesting findings that are going to present from our colleagues. I just want to thank you for bringing us into this event and allowing us to share this interesting data from this very interesting initiative that comes directly from civil society and also as a result of civil society organizations in our both countries. Thank you very much.
Mentor, thank you very much. And now it's time, you mentioned those survey results, and now it's time to turn to the experts who oversaw these projects and to dive in and actually find out what these results are. And to do that, we're going to begin with Maya Bielosh, who joined BCSP in 2009. And Maya has authored a number of policy papers, particularly on defense and security, as well as gender equality. And her work focuses on the foreign and security policy of Serbia and Kosovo. And Maya, before I give you the floor, let me just, for those who joined late, we begin with this panel on Serbia and Kosovo, and we'll follow immediately in an hour on foreign influence and foreign relations. Maya, please.
Thank you, Ed, for this brief introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to present today perspective of Serbian citizens on Kosovo-Serbia relations. So I will share with you my presentation. Just give me a second. Okay. And I will start actually by giving you some more information and details about survey methodology. The research was conducted on a representative sample of 1,095 respondents from Serbia in the period from the beginning to the mid-October this year. And on this slide, you can see the structure of respondents according to 4 different variables. I will start this presentation with offering the citizens' view on Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. The BCSP main research finding showed that the existence of cognitive dissonance in citizens' attitudes towards Kosovo and the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue that could be traced throughout the time. Half of Serbian citizens support the dialogue as a way to resolve the Kosovo dispute peacefully, but are unfamiliar with its content. They believe the dialogue has not changed anything so far and do not see the personal benefits in their lives. The confusion in people's minds is the result of the unclear government policy on Kosovo, then the non-transparency of the dialogue process, as well as media propaganda accompanied by the contradictory narratives and statements by local politicians and dialogue facilitators or envoys. Statements like, "We had a fruitful meeting and dialogue is a long and winding road," have become commonplace in both Serbia and Kosovo. Although Kosovo is omnipresent in the Serbian press as a topic, data on the content of the dialogue are limited or non-existent. What you can see on this slide is that the relative majority of respondents do not know what is Serbia's goal in the negotiations. However, almost 2/3 support Serbia's agenda in the dialogue, a fact that shows a little critical examination of the government's decision, but also speaks a volume about immense blind trust in their intentions. The Kosovo dispute remains the dominant issue of Serbian foreign policy, as evident from the last chart. The dominant perception of almost 2/3 of respondents is that primary condition for EU membership is resolving the Kosovo dispute, which helps explain the negative attitude towards the EU, because the preservation of Kosovo within Serbia is seen as the most important political priority, foreign policy priority of Serbia. When it comes to the final solution, therefore, the final solution for almost half of the Serbian citizens is the return of Kosovo with greater autonomy. The land swap was unofficially the subject of Brussels dialogue, and it was supported by Trump's administration as well. However, this idea, launched by the Serbian president in 2018, is not supported by 85.5% of citizens. The creation of association of municipalities with a Serbian majority is a good final solution for only 29%. Mutual recognition is not acceptable solution as well for a majority of Serbian citizens. However, even if Serbia recognizes Kosovo, 40% of citizens believe that it would not affect their everyday life. 1/4 would feel a loss of identity, and 1/5 would feel humiliated. Such attitudes are understandable if we keep in mind that the most common association of Kosovo are monasteries and Serbian heritage, the narrative about Kosovo as the heart of Serbia, and the cradle of Serbs and Serbian identity. That is why it is not surprising that a part of the citizens identify themselves with Kosovo, that they believe that Kosovo was taken away from Serbia and that the only final solution is to return it. The dialogue takes place in an atmosphere in which great mistrust toward Albanians prevails. Although citizens want for Kosovo to be returned to Serbia, it is unacceptable for the vast majority that Kosovo Albanians have a significant role in public life and society because they think that the differences are too great. They would not accept Kosovo Albanians to be public officials or to be married to any of their family members, and 2/3 refuse to be their superiors at work. Distrust toward Kosovo Albanians stems from the conflict in Kosovo in 1999. However, Serbian officials who incite war, spread hate speech, and deny war crimes against Albanians through the media also have credit for this. Belligerent rhetoric undermines the belief that normalization of relations and lasting peace between Serbs and Albanians are achievable in the near future. So you can see in this slide that people are skeptical about peaceful and normal neutral relations in the near future. A very high percentage think that the final agreement will never be reached. There is also a strong sense of victimhood. However, the awareness that crimes were committed in Kosovo and that Serbia is responsible for that is completely absent or suppressed. Nevertheless, for majority of the respondents in our survey, an agreement between Kosovo and Serbia in which the issue of war crimes was left out would not be acceptable. The BCSP survey indicates that the soft power of the government to influence the attitudes of citizens and shape public opinion, since you can see that almost 64% of citizens receive information about Kosovo through television and public broadcaster. The government obviously has the tools to influence citizens and gain their unconditional trust. Yes, yet these are not used to normalize relations between the two communities and the people. And this power of media was evident in the case of the Trump's administration and the Washington Agreement, because Trump's administration was presented in Serbian press as Serbia's ally in reaching the agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. And Trump's administration brokered the so-called agreement on economic normalization between Kosovo and Serbia. Although the Washington Agreement was presented to the domestic public as a historic one, the Serbian authorities did not clearly communicate what its content was. So you can see that 1/3 of respondents are partially familiar with the content of the agreement, while almost half of the citizens know that actually something was signed in the Washington. So people are confused. They think that this agreement will have no effect, or they believe that the agreement is actually a step towards the recognition of Kosovo. Only a small percentage of people truly believe that it contributes to the economic connection between Kosovo and Serbia. However, when citizens are asked about the content of the agreement, over 70% support transitional justice issues, 10 infrastructural projects, and to a lesser extent, the mutual recognition of diplomas. As you can see from this table, citizens oppose suspension of Serbia and Kosovo their recognition campaign and transfer of the Serbian embassy to Jerusalem. I will stop here my presentation, but I will give you some my takeaways for this presentation. And my takeaways are actually that politicians change their minds if there is strong political pressure, and strong bottom-up and top-down pressure needs to be created, while US and EU political presence is crucial to achieving the final solution. On contrary, people could change their minds if they are properly informed or influenced by media. So solution could be found in different public diplomacy or freeing up media space for different voices about Kosovo. So thank you for your attention.
Maya, thank you very much for that. And we're going to move right now to the Kosovar survey on this same topic. And for that, we have our expert from KCSS, Plator Avdiu. And Plator is a researcher with KCSS who went far from Kosovo to do his studies. He earned his master's degree in Latvia, at the University of Latvia in Riga. And in addition to his research on NATO and EU enlargement and the security sector, Plator has, for several years, was a television journalist for Kohavision, covering political and security events and producing documentaries. Plator, please.
Yeah, hi Ed, hi everyone. Thank you for the presentation and for the opportunity. As long as we have like 10 minutes presentation for each panelist, I will start screening my presentation here. So it will just take some seconds, I guess. So here it is. Yeah. Okay, so just briefing you of the latest edition that we launched regarding the Western Balkan Security Barometer. We did the field research in Kosovo from late September and early October of this year. We did the survey throughout Kosovo, and it was really representative in terms of gender and ethnic communities as well. So let me start with the presentation. Good news is that, for example, for the let's say good news for government, probably that most of the respondents are in favor of the dialogue. However, on the other hand, this does not mean that things are going on the right track, because as you can see from here, citizens do not feel some improvements or some new changes from the dialogue itself. And this is very bad, given that there were a number of technical agreements from Brussels dialogue, and it seems that, for example, for around 80% of people do not feel any benefits from the dialogue, or for example, that the dialogue in the eyes of respondents has not changed anything, and this is a great alert for the government and also for the facilitators that citizens are not satisfied with this dialogue. However, what is interesting here to mention is that around 30% of people do not know what is the Kosovo's objective on this dialogue, and this is very normal given the lack of transparency, in fact, by the let's say by our governments, by our representation, but on the other hand, also the lack of transparency even by the European Union or even the US recently, where people were just having no information of what is currently being discussed in the dialogue. So let's go more deep on some issues which have dominated the public discourse in at least in Kosovo probably, but also in other arena like in Serbia or in Brussels and in Washington. What is really interesting and very expected is that people in Kosovo are fiercely against the establishing association or community of Serbian municipalities in Kosovo as a part of a final deal between Kosovo and Serbia. So there is still high percentage of people opposing the association. The same is applicable also to the so-called idea land swaps between Kosovo and Serbia, very much circulated in the recent years by Kosovo, by Serbia, but also, and what is interesting to mention is that for the first time during this year, senior political figures from US and from EU have accepted, nevertheless, that this idea has been circulating on the dialogue. And as you can see, almost 90% of people are against that. But when asked about what is the best solution for Kosovo in dialogue, almost 80% of respondents were responded that the final solution should be Kosovo's recognition by Serbia within existing borders, without land swaps or without kind of any special status for Serbian monasteries here or for association. So this is the basic idea. This is another critique for government when we jump to another questions about the current stance that Kosovo government have in the dialogue, where only 18% of people, for example, support the current stance of the Kosovo government, and this comes due to many other reasons. Many respondents think that EU membership can be reached only if we go through the final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. On the other hand, citizens are in favor of putting conditions towards Serbia in the dialogue, especially by the international community, and in this regard by EU and US mediators. It is interesting to see the support rate of US mediator Richard Granell and EU mediator Miroslav Lajčák on dialogue, where there is a quite low rate of let's say assessing in a good manner both mediators by Kosovo respondents. Let me jump to some ideas circulated in the Washington Agreement. Citizens, in fact, are not that much in supporting, let's say, Kosovo government when it comes especially to the suspensions of membership into international organizations. As you can see, for example, almost majority of respondents do not agree that government did that kind of concession. On the other hand, it has resulted that almost 60%, which is above the majority of respondents, are not familiar with the idea of mini Schengen, and this comes due to lack of transparency of let's say a former Kosovo president or Kosovo government, or even by those who initiated the idea, let's say from President of Serbia, Albania, and North Macedonia, who were the first to initiate this idea. When it comes to reaching the agreement and let's say having peaceful normalization between both countries, citizens are let's say quite divided somehow, but it can be said that almost majority of them are in favor of reaching agreement with Serbia and having peaceful relations with Serbia. It is interesting to see that citizens get information about let's say about dialogue, about Kosovo-Serbia relations, mainly through media channels, let's say from television and from internet, where it can be online portals and the social media platforms, and this sometimes can be quite misleading in terms of informing properly the citizens, so they can still be quite uninformed somehow when it comes to the Kosovo-Serbia relations. Interesting to see that from respondents, only 60, let's say above majority somehow, have not met any Serbian citizens, while only 39% of them have accepted to have met some Serbian citizens. And the last slides will be regards of two identity issues between Kosovo and Serbia. Kind of above majority of respondents do not feel to drive through Serbia with Kosovo's car plates. And this is very interesting, because there were many agreements in the EU facilitated dialogue on this, and the citizens have not make any kind of issue here. So yeah, people still do not feel safe to drive there. And let me mention also that this comes also not only as a technical issue, but as a political, knowing some problems that, for example, people have in the crossing borders between Kosovo and Serbia. And the last question for this is also the how, for example, would perceive Kosovar citizens, a Serbian citizen in Kosovo. As you can see, for example, people in Kosovo are not against, for example, that a Serbian citizen to live in Kosovo, but when it comes to some more sensitive issues, like being married with a Serbian, or be a public official in Kosovo, be a children teacher, many respondents, or almost 80–90% of them are against of having this kind of direct interaction with Serbian citizens. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very interested on the next session, and I mean on the question that you may have, and also the audience. And I hope those are just like a fresh up for the discussion that we can have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've heard from the key experts on from the Serbia survey and from the Kosovo survey. And now let's bring on to discuss these Nicola Barazer. And Nicola is program director at the Center for Contemporary Politics and executive editor at European Western Balkans. He was previously a researcher at the Belgrade Forum for Ethnic Relations and in Zagreb at the Institute for Development and International Relations. And he's also studied and taught in Budapest. Nicola, please, quite interested in how you process these results.
Well, thank you very much, Edward. And when looking at these surveys and listening to our panelists, I get the impression that even though these results can be seen as paradoxical, having in mind the content of the findings, I still do not see it paradoxical that the citizens actually hold these views. I can see this perfectly fitting into the picture which is presented by the governments themselves. So we basically see the consequence of the communication of the governments about the dialogue now basically having a very strong effect on how the citizens perceive the dialogue itself. So people support the dialogue. because the governments tell them that there should be dialogue. They also, of course, engage in a dialogue. All governments in the past 9 years have engaged in the dialogue, but citizens also do not really see any concrete benefits from it. They have no trust in the process. And this is also the kind of message sent by the political elites, that basically things are not really working out. And of course, when you look at the positions of both Serbs and Kosovans, you can see that while the citizens want the territory, so they're concerned about preserving the territorial, basically, the whole territory of the state, and they're concerned about sovereignty. They're not really that ready to accept members of the other ethnic group as their fellow citizens. So it could be summed up as, we want the territory, but we don't really want these people to be our compatriots. And this is also something that fits quite well in this picture. Now, when you look at how the Serbian and Kosovan government have presented the dialogue since the very beginning, it could be said that while Serbia presented the dialogue as a way to save Kosovo, to preserve Kosovo as a part of Serbia, Kosovo has insisted from the very beginning that it's a process with only one result, and the result is mutual recognition, or let's say recognition of Kosovo's independence by Serbia. And this is exactly how they have communicated over the years. They have presented the dialogue as a kind of a zero-sum game where the two sides are practically battling each other. If one wins, the other loses, and therefore they're using all possible means to, let's say, achieve more favorable outcomes for their sides. Harsh rhetorics have never moved away from the forefront. You see it, I think, in both Serbia and Kosovo, and this goes in hand with the idea that there should be dialogue, which is kind of paradoxical, because to have a dialogue with whom if this other ethnic group is perceived as being the enemy? And this is exactly what we're seeing here for years. And even when there is some hint of, let's say, compromise, or some hint of promoting the idea of compromise, like for example, we had in Serbia here in the past 2 years this idea of razgraničenje, or we can say it as a land swap or border change. Yes, it was a message of that there should be a compromise, but even this idea was in a way that we should be cut off from them. They should be cut off from us, actually. And therefore, it is also a message which goes contrary to the whole idea of normalization and of all these people living together in the future. Now, when it comes to Serbia proper, like at the same time when we have the government engaging in the dialogue, we have members of the parliament, we have state-controlled media, or actually lead ruling party-controlled media, and these phantom media portals who are targeting people for being traitors and foreign mercenaries and spies, and there's practically no space to say anything critical about the government, especially when it comes to these very sensitive topics. And therefore, many people from the society are very reluctant to engage in any kind of let's say criticism from that position, because it would be perceived as quite negative by all of these media. We had here in Serbia this internal dialogue 3 years ago, which did not result in any particular outcome. We haven't seen what was the, let's say, conclusion from this internal dialogue. We haven't seen many, let's say, stakeholders actually taking part in the dialogue, and therefore it simply died out. And of course, as I mentioned, these media who are very frequently mouthpieces of the government, and then tend to communicate exactly the kind of picture that the government tries to present. So it should not really be that surprising that you see the result, which is this kind of position of the citizens about the dialogue. But when we look at the whole picture, I tried to find something positive, something negative from all of this. First, to begin with the negatives. Of course, there is a great deal of mistrust, I would say, between the two communities. I'm particularly shocked about the survey, about the results, how many people would accept marriages with a family member with somebody from the other ethnic group. So only 23% in Serbia would accept it, and only 4% in Kosovo. I find this to be really shocking, more shocking than I really expected. Also, we have a situation where these political elites, despite being committed to the dialogue, do not really have the courage to speak openly about what the dialogue is about, what should realistically be expected as the outcome, and why is the dialogue even taking place. The Serbian government is not really ready to present the dialogue as a process of basically formally or in a particular way recognizing accepting Kosovo's sovereignty in a way. And of course, it should be debated how exactly should this be done. And the Kosovo government is quite reluctant to communicate that some kind of an agreement with Serbia is the only way how Kosovo can actually move forward in its EU accession process and actually become a sovereign state it believes it is. And also, when we see that the EU integration has lost its appeal in recent years due to both issues here in the Western Balkans and EU proper, there is now much less of an incentive of the governments to be, let's say, more brave when it comes to the dialogue, and the carrot is not really there as much as it used to be. And finally, there is not really a lot of links between the societies. We saw that basically a majority of the people never met individual from the other communities. So basically our links are what we have between the two governments. And if you really want to have normalization relations, we need to have contacts between the two communities on all possible levels. This is the only way how we can move forward. What is good? I find it good that despite all of this, the citizens still believe that the dialogue is the best way to move forward. So they're not really choosing status quo or, God forbid, some kind of militaristic option, but they're actually opting for the dialogue. This is something that is a very strong message and should not be underestimated. Secondly, in the last 9 years, how dialogue is taking place, we have normalized these high-level meetings. We have normalized discussions between the two governments. We have, in a way, let's say, we have moved a lot in the past 9 years, and this is something which is a good sign for the future. And one thing which I mentioned as being negative, but it can also be positive, is that obviously governments can influence public perceptions. And we saw, actually, this is what I argue, how the governments present the dialogue. But what would happen if they would change their position? What would happen if they would actually change their way of communicating? Maybe we would see then the positive consequences of the possibility of the governments to influence public opinion. Finally, to conclude, what I see as the recommendation, what I see from all of this, what should be done to actually move the dialogue forward. So first of all, I think that we should end with ambiguity. We should end with the two governments going back home for Brussels and explaining the agreements in like completely different ways. This is not how things can actually move forward. Secondly, societal dialogue needs to be launched in both Serbia and Kosovo, and of course between the two societies. There should be much more open talk about the interests of the two communities, of the people living in both Serbia and Kosovo. If we actually want to find a proper support for the dialogue process, regardless of what the government's interests may be. Finally, the narrative needs to be changed. We have seen in the example of North Macedonia and Greece, how when they changed the narrative, when they stopped making it a zero-sum game and actually started talking about the future and cooperation and the common interests of all these people, this is where we saw the results. We saw implementation, and we saw a complete change of relation between Greece and North Macedonia. This is exactly how this should be done in the example of Serbia and Kosovo, because if things continue this way, I do not see where the support for the dialogue and for the agreement can be found. And finally, democracy is an important, let's say, factor in making any kind of agreement sustainable. So democratic governments are the only ones who can actually solve this problem and do it in a way which will be seen as legitimate by the citizens.
Nicola, thank you for all that. And we're going to continue now with discussion. And again, your questions, feel free to share those in the Q&A. And to Maya and Plator, I encourage you to jump in anytime, just wave to me if you have something to say. But Nicola, I thought you did a great job of identifying both the negative and the positive. And I was very pleased in particular that you identified the often overlooked precedent, very positive precedent of the Prespa agreement between North Macedonia and Greece. And just to cite one of those very surprising, Nicola, what you said was one of the most astonishing and in a negative way results of the survey. And I should emphasize here that these are matched on both in Kosovo and in Serbia, were these highly negative views about I wouldn't want the other, either a Serbian citizen or a Kosovar citizen, to be a teacher of my kids or to be a public official. And I would just point out this terrific example we have from North Macedonia, where the foreign minister, Bujar Osmani, is representing the country, and actually he is representing the ethnic Macedonian interest when it comes to these identity issues, these very sensitive identity issues that involve Bulgaria. He's the lead advocate for effectively what are ethnically national Macedonian issues. We have an ethnic Albanian foreign minister, and it's taken as normal. In fact, I think most people think he's doing a good job as an advocate on these issues. And so it's a terrific example, of course. What is different and what's missing in the equation can be summed up in one word: leadership. So you had in both Skopje and in Athens leaders who were interested in actually doing the hard work of resolving these difficult issues and moving forward. And of course, Maya, I'm going to turn to you now and ask you about in Belgrade here with respect to these survey results. What do you take from this, given here we have an asymmetry here, because we have in Serbia, Alexander Vučić has this dominance, both political and in the media space and in other areas, but particularly. So the narrative is much more easily controlled there, whereas Nicola pointed out and said that when they come back to their capitals, they should not be ambiguous. When Prime Minister Hoti comes back from these meetings, he faces constant criticism, very strong criticism. Why are you doing this? And you cannot talk about the association. Alexander Vučić dominates the political scene in Belgrade. So my question, Maya, let me ask you, how do you perceive that this narrative is operating in Serbia? Is there a plan why the public narrative towards Kosovo is so negative and hostile, given if the objective nominally is to come to some agreement? Just appreciate your perspectives on that.
Okay, thank you, Ed. I will share you my personal perspective. Maybe like the other have some other insights, but the thing is that control of media and media narrative about Kosovo is very strong in Serbia. So you can see only President Vučić and a few other officials speaking about Kosovo in the mainstream media and the Serbian tabloids. So they are also part of that puzzle and the picture who actually creates the dominant narrative about Kosovo. The media are like really important part of the creating that very negative narrative about Albanians and Kosovo. Also about Republika Srpska, which is often very much in the public discourse and narrative linked to the Kosovo, because you always have, like, whenever it's something about Kosovo, you also have like Milorad Dodik saying something that Serbia, if Albanians have their rights on self-determination than Serbs from Republika Srpska also should have. And that's also like very much pushed through the Serbian media and very much used. So you also have this kind of links. But what our research shows, for example, in this case, is that Kosovo is more important for Serbian citizens than Republika Srpska. And why I'm saying this, according to the polls, 80% of respondents or citizens do not agree with Serbia recognizing Kosovo independence if it gets Republika Srpska in the return, for example. When it comes to the why is this like negative perception, is that also one part of the answer is that officials through the media are trying to polarize society and better control their emotions when needed for political ends. But also, like for Vučić and the ruling elite, is quite important to present himself as a peacemaker internationally. While he polarized through the media and through their narratives societies within the Serbia and even two communities, he is using this negative narratives to actually, at the end, to present himself to the international audience as a peacemaker and peace broker. So, but he is really doing that perfectly with the example of Washington Agreement, or he's trying to push mini Schengen initiative also as a regional initiatives to show that Serbs and Albanians in the Balkan region can cooperate and work like better. So he's using this thing, which made me think and conclude that actually land swap, the idea of the land swap, was not for domestic use, but only for the international use. I will maybe clarify this because our research shows that Serbian citizens do not support either division of Kosovo or land swap or exchange of territories. So these solutions are not supported. And I believe that Vučić knew this at the very moment he launched the idea of a land swap, that actually Serbian citizens do not support it because he frequently measures public opinions because of their policies. So my conclusion, it was not for domestic audience, but only for international audience to buy time to find either different kind of solutions for him. So he needs that kind of narrative and the media for both internal use, but also for international audience, because he wants to present himself as someone who will offer a deal and maybe who can work with Russia and China on this if they're trying to stop it.
Thank you. Maya, I take that key point from you that you see sort of the underlying strategic posture here is one of buying time. And now I want to bring Plator into the conversation and also raise some of the questions that we've had from some of our viewers. And here, Plator, as I bring you in, and Maya and Nicola as well, it's worth just quickly running down the compare and contrast here. And so I think Nicola alluded to this. In a lot of cases, the views are either similar or they're the predictable, anticipated mirror image of what Serbian citizens believe is the optimal outcome and what Kosovar. And those are not surprising in many respects. Among the few differences are about the overall optimism or pessimism, where we have Kosovars are almost half say that yes, it is possible to have peaceful relations between Serbian citizens and Kosovo citizens, almost half. And in Serbia, that's just about 80% say no. It's not even possible. And so that, to me, that's one of the few differences. But otherwise, I take Nicola's point that these are largely, in many respects, mirror images of one another, and including, again, these very sharp biases at a societal level in both, it has to be said, in both countries there. And Plator, we have a question from one of our viewers who asks, any idea about how to overcome this distance? And again, it's worth noting the Washington Agreement did nothing in that score, despite the enthusiasm by officials in Pristina and Belgrade. Please, Plator.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, the results shows many differences, and there are distinctive differences between results in Kosovo and Serbia, and this is in fact in line also with the current public discourse in both countries. What is surprising is that in Serbia the negative perception are higher than in Kosovo, and this is not really good. Because this will be used, I guess, also from current Serbian President Vučić in order to use this kind of lack of enthusiasm from Serbian public, if we can say so, in order to have more harsh discourse towards dialogue itself. But I don't see the whole pictures black and white, because I think with the new U.S. administration coming in the White House, I think that Euro-Atlantic boundaries will be returned, and because this will be very important for the dialogue itself, because in the past years there was a let's say a lack of Euro-Atlantic unity in terms of cooperation of U.S. administration with Europe. Because I'm mentioning this because this can directly lead to a more close links of EU and US when it comes to the dialogue, because we have seen this kind of unity in the past, let's say from 2008 and on. But when we talk about the especially about the final solution, let me just be very clear on this, because this is very linked with two questions in our survey. A large majority of people in Kosovo think that EU membership can be reached only with a final deal, and that the final deal, according to our respondents, can come only by mutual recognition of both countries. Now, if we and this is in fact in line with the whole declaratory effects of the European Union itself, asking from us to solve the bilateral disputes, and one way to do so is by mutual recognition. Inevitably, and what I see a lack of political will of Serbia is that to deal especially with the past, because we have to deal with the past in order to see some reflections on how to deal. And this is one of my feedback, in fact, to one of the questions that I saw in the Q&A section of what should we do. It is very simple. We have to deal with the past, because the past is leaving us, let's say, without agreement, without some concrete measures, which is confirmed by citizens. Because when citizens are not satisfied with the technical agreements of the dialogue, how can we satisfy them with a political deal? This would be impossible, and I see that the key barrier is let's say Serbia reluctance dealing with its past and with its action doing in Kosovo before 1999, and because I saw, for example, that the a solid majority of Serbian citizens, they still think that, for example, Kosovo should remain under Serbian administration, and Serbia should have still more wider autonomy. But I do not think that with those kind of feedback we can solve bilateral disputes. And we definitely will not have, let's say, a common solution. But I do really hope that with the return of Euro-Atlantic unity, that hopefully the elect President Biden will further enhance that with European Union. I think that would be way more positive pressure towards both countries on this. The main problem is that Kosovo has a very weak government, in fact, which cannot maybe push some kind of agreements. But probably we will have some new changes, maybe in Kosovo, organizing new election, or I don't know. But this is maybe one of the technical problems in Kosovo. But I think this can be overcome in the let's say in the coming months, or what is going to happen with the political situation right now in
thank you, Platon. And here I'm going to turn. We have just a couple of minutes here, and I'd like to bring Nicola back in and point out a couple important things that Platon has highlighted, and that is for me one of the surprising results, Maya and Nicola, was just how high the support is for returning Kosovo to Serbia. I have to admit, I was surprised that so many people were still talking about that. And I'll tell you additional reason why I'm surprised is because that's one of the few areas that President Vučić has very occasionally, but clearly, it has to be said, including in Parliament, has said, look, we have to be realistic. And he has said that a couple times. He said, of course, his narrative is very different, but he has said that a couple of times. And he then, of course, had this big statement about he wanted to open an internal dialogue on Serbia. Of course, nothing serious was ever done about that. And again, the rest of the rhetoric is harsh and very negative. And so I have to admit that the fact that those numbers, which even without that comment from Vučić, people might have expected that people would have realized, look, that's not happening. And so, Nicola, let me turn to you. And please also jump in here. But Nicola, I want to ask you this fundamental question about public opinion and the government and President Vučić. Is this, in your view, just a completely cynical understanding where, okay, we operate the media and have this various influence and control on public opinion, and we adjusted the dials as we want? Or is there an element here of what we would call the cat chasing the tail, where there's a negative narrative planted, there's a realization that, oh my gosh, there's an expectation for us to be very strong and tough and harsh against Albanians. And so then there is a reaction to that and a belief, oh, we have to deliver on this public expectation of being tough and harsh. And then, of course, that only increases then the public appetite, which you have, again, as I say, the cat chasing the tail. Or is it one of a very analytical and detached perspective? Please.
Well, I will try to answer. Well, first of all, to your question about this result where 50%, around 50% of the population would choose Kosovo remaining as a part of Serbia as the best solution. Now the question was, if I'm not mistaken, what would be the ideal solution, not what would be the realistic solution. And also, my impression is that Serbian citizens are not really aware about what the situation is in Kosovo. They're not really aware about yet ethnic composition, about geography of Kosovo. For example, we have seen when this whole discussion about the border change appeared, we have seen that many people do not really know that majority of Serbs lives under the Ibar River and not in the north, etc., etc. And of course, I think there is both. There is this whole, I would say that the government does this on purpose to keep this kind of narrative alive. But at the same time, I think the government is concerned about its own electorate, because the electorate of the ruling party in Serbia is, let's say, more to the right and more in the direction of not giving up on Kosovo, and they're naturally quite concerned about what would be the let's say the opinion of their electorate. So they're very careful not to be seen by their electorate as traitors. And this is why you see sometimes these paradoxes where they are in fact negotiating with the Kosovo government. They're shaking hands with the people which only 10 years ago would be unimaginable to have them as interlocutors, but at the same time keep this kind of narrative where, for example, if I go to Kosovo and also shake some hands down there, I will be a traitor. And this is this kind of, let's say, schizophrenical situation that we have here in Serbia. So yes, I hope that I managed to answer. So it is in a way on purpose, but also it's in a way a reaction to the already held beliefs in the electorate, because there is practically no political party in Serbia which has opted for or proposed recognizing Kosovo's independence, or even making any steps more than what Vučić already makes. So in this situation, it is natural that this is the kind of the public opinion that they're going to have.
Nicola, thank you for that. Still, it's a puzzle to me in that context why a president who, if it's true, believes he needs to somehow come to an agreement wouldn't introduce things to modulate and moderate the public narrative, for example, to have a internal dialogue. Maya, let me give you the floor for some closing remarks.
Three words. Yeah. Well, because the most important interest of Vučić is to stay in power. Everything else is secondary.
Of course. Well said. But if we accept this construct, and it may be a wrong construct, that he believes he has to, at some point, because for joining the EU, if that is a genuine aspiration, that he needs to make a deal, one would expect that he would try to do the things to enable him to stay in power and accomplish that objective. But we don't know, maybe some of the premise of that is wrong. Maya, please, some closing remarks, and then we're going to quickly turn to our next panel.
Okay. I will come back again to like my fruits for thought for you, because what I said is actually that politicians can change their minds if there is strong pressure from the citizens or international audience, and they can change rhetorics and use like a media, because like media is a powerful tool for this ruling elite, to use it completely differently to change people's perceptions. We have seen this when it comes to the US in this short period of time. Also, like our other researchers shows that people can change their minds and like public could be influenced through the media. But there is constant double messaging. And for example, I will give you the examples. Like there is a clear policy denial of war crimes at the highest level. And then beneath that is not that much visible, there is a cooperation when it comes to the mass graves. So you have like this kind of thing. We will deny war crimes, but we will be cooperated when it comes to actually exposing that we have like mass graves in Serbia. Or like double messages that Serbia will not recognize Kosovo independence, and what Vučić said in his recent statement that he discussed with Chancellor Merkel, but he said our positions will not change. And then you have like a second message, we have to be realistic. Kosovo is independent. So the constant like double narrative confuses Serbian public. That's why like our finding is that like there's a lot of confusion and cognitive dissonance that needs to be addressed because people are quite confused.
Thank you, Maya. And it's interesting, you noted and Plator noted about war crimes. And that real quickly, that was one of the few positives for me, was I saw that in the survey, there actually is support, strong support for finding out about missing persons and displaced persons and refugees and prosecutions. And even I saw the point that some 50% of Serbian citizens said they do support prosecution of Serb war crimes as long as the other side are prosecuted. And of course, we've seen evidence of that. Plator, with your permission, I would like to, because if it's okay with you, unless you have a burning remark, I would like to now open our second panel, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
Plator, but of course, if you had something critical to say, by all means. But I want to thank you, Plator. I want to thank Maya and Nicola as well. Terrific discussion. And now, again, I think we'll have another quite rich and stimulating discussion. And I'm going to ask our technical advisors here to set things up, and we will roll into that second panel as quickly as I can. And again, my thanks to the outstanding team at SAIS Events for their assistance here with us. You can see how professionally they operate. And so if we have Vuksanovic on the screen, I will begin with Vuk. Nice to see you. Welcome. And I'll again do brief introductions of our esteemed experts here. Vuksanovic just joined BCSP after his studies in Belgrade and in London as well, where he studied at the London School of Economics, where he is working on his PhD. He has also been an associate at the LSE think tank called LSE Ideas. His research focuses on the politics of the great powers, particularly in the Balkans. He's the author of commentators in the UK, the US, and the EU, as well as in Serbian media. Vuk, I believe as well, has served in Serbia's MFA. Vuk, please, you have the floor.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for the kind introduction. Now I will share the PowerPoint presentation with the rest. Now, here it is. Now, I want to say just one thing. I think that the biggest value of this public, and my part will focus on how Serbian citizens perceive great powers. And I think that this research provides one big value. I think it speaks about the interplay that we have between domestic political powers, like in this case, public opinion perceptions, and the country's foreign policy behavior. But I also think that this correlation between the state and society is a two-way street. So the state structure, the political elites, they also form this public opinion environment. So it is a two-way street. So it speaks both about how the public opinion shapes the foreign policy behavior, but also how the policy elites communicate with its citizenry on big issues. So as a form of introduction, I want to show you one slide. So when the Serbs were asked what threatens Serbia's security from the outside, you can see that great powers, geopolitical pressures, espionage. So on one hand, it does speak about this objective external environment where we have seen a lot of activities, foreign policy activities in recent years, Belgrade engaging with numerous great powers. But I also think it is a product of the narrative which was being pushed by the incumbent leadership in Belgrade, where they were constantly portraying Serbia as being in the middle of geopolitical great power intrigues, where they were constantly trying to win influence in Serbia. So on this front, I want to show you how, for the beginning, here is a very defeating data on how Serbs perceive the EU. Now we have above 50%, 51% of the Serbs who believe that Serbia should not become a member of the European Union. At the same time, here, we believe we have a very big percentage, 59% of people who believe that Serbia will never become a member of the European Union. On one hand, it has been the product of objective external environment, where we have seen a lot of bad news from the European Union, the Eurozone crisis back in 2008, then afterwards the migrant crisis, Brexit. They have all impeded the EU's ability to enlarge to the Balkans, so that resulted in the drop of EU enthusiasm. But I also think that it has been the product of the way that the Serbian leadership communicates with the wider society, where, for example, Serbian citizens frequently do not know that the EU is the greatest donor and the greatest economic partner of Serbia. So in a sense, this also results in the severe drop in the EU enthusiasm, and it also speaks about the geopolitical state of a regional power vacuum, which allowed non-Western powers to play a much more assertive role. Then, of course, we reach to the second great power, the second big pillar of the West, which is the United States. Now, this represents always a very big impediment for Serbian policy towards the US, where because of the legacies of the 1990s, and as a result of, as an emotional reaction to Kosovo's independence in 2008, the US is perceived as, is usually perceived by some in the public opinion as the enemy of Serbia. 13% of them. I mean, just to give you another data, there are only 3% of people who believe that Serbia should join NATO. So that tells you quite a lot. So this is always a problem for any Belgrade government which wants to engage with the US. However, I also want to say that this is relatively low, given the hard history between the US and Serbia. And this has been, I think, the product of pro-Trump rhetoric that we have seen from the Serbian political elites, where Trump was perceived as someone from whom Serbia can get a less painful settlement of the Kosovo dispute, and with whom Serbia can establish a partnership, something which Belgrade desired for decades but failed to do so. However, I think that now we will have a very big problem. Joe Biden is very unpopular in Serbia as a result of him being an ardent advocate of US interventionism during the Yugoslav wars. So I wouldn't be surprised if these percentages in case of the US would increase. And that would create a very big domestic hurdle and impediment for Belgrade both to engage with the US on Kosovo or bilaterally. And now we reach to the non-Western powers, to Russia and China. Now, public opinion is a very big factor in bilateral ties between Belgrade and Moscow. As you have seen, there are 40% of individuals who believe that Russia is the greatest friend of Serbia, followed by China, 16%. On one hand, it has been the product, as I said, of emotional backlash to them and the memories of the 1990s and the reaction to the Kosovo's independence in 2008. So in a sense, Kosovo dispute plays a powerful role in relations with Russia. As long as the Serbian leadership is vulnerable domestically on Kosovo dispute in terms of public opinion, you have to conduct anti-secessionist policies. And if you conduct these type of policies, you need Russia and the UN Security Council. But it also goes beyond that. Because as a result, because there is this high popularity of Russia, all political parties in Serbia, all political leaders, regardless of what is their ideological profile, they balance in foreign policy terms between Russia and the West in hope that way they will be able to catch the electoral votes of both pro-Western and pro-Russian Serbs. So they try to be catch-all political parties. And I think we have seen this particularly since 2014, when Vučić consolidated his powers, when he ceased being the first deputy prime minister and became the prime minister, but also as a result of the Ukraine crisis. So number one, he's trying to, very frequently, this pro-Russian narrative from the Serbian leadership is a way to court the pro-Russian parts of the Serbian public opinion. And that way, he's both scoring domestic points, but in a sense, I think he's also sending a message to the West. He's generating, Vučić that way generates perception that he is one of the rare pro-European, pro-Western figures in Belgrade, and that he is constantly encircled by pro-Russian players, and that the West needs to prop him up in order to avoid being replaced by a pro-Russian, by some of the pro-Russian players in Serbia. However, as a result, we have seen now that 57% of the Serbian citizens believe that Serbia should harmonize and align its foreign policy with foreign policies of Russia and China as a result of this narrative. But I will also tell you one thing. I think that this has become a major obstacle for Vučić now, this high popularity of Putin and Russia in Serbia. Why? Because Russia does not want to have to resolve the Kosovo dispute unless it gets something in return from the US in some hypothetical great power bargaining. So this creates a phobia for Vučić. If Putin vetoes any resolution to the Kosovo dispute that he negotiates with Pristina and with the West, if Putin puts a veto on that resolution in the UN Security Council, that will be a domestic political fiasco for him, because a majority of the Serbs would perceive this situation not as Moscow sabotaging an agreement negotiated by Belgrade, but as a situation in which Putin is greater Serb than Vučić himself, more willing to defend Serbian position on Kosovo than Vučić himself. So that is one of the reasons why we haven't seen that much of a pro-Russian narrative in the last year and a half. I mean, first, during the COVID-19 pandemics, the Russian aid was not greeted with the same level of enthusiasm as the Chinese aid. And second, during the July violent July protests in Belgrade, which were instigated by both growing illiberalism at home, but also by Vučić's reimposition of the lockdown, we have seen that the pro-government media have accused Russia and pro-Russian elements of fomenting these unrests, which tells you something that now the incumbent elite in Serbia is willing to scapegoat Russia, both for domestic usage as well as to curry favor with the West. However, I think that given the unresolved Kosovo dispute and despite the fact that this partnership is on a downward spiral, given the public opinion polls and given the still unresolved Kosovo issue, not all ties will be severed between Belgrade and Moscow, particularly in light of the fact that the new US administration is arriving, so they might still need Russian backing in the UN Security Council. So this brings us to China, Serbia's big brother, as Vučić liked to call it, the new big brother, as we called it in our analysis. Now, over the last couple of years, we have seen an increasing pro-Chinese narrative by the ruling political structures in Serbia and by the media. And particularly since Serbia became a major recipient of Chinese infrastructural lending through Belt and Road Initiative. And as a result, the pro-Chinese narrative has been increased. And at the same time, I also have to say that the knowledge in Serbia about the Chinese is very limited. There are very few sinologists in Serbia. The public opinion is largely uninformed about Chinese domestic politics or about its foreign policy. For example, most of the Serbs that I communicate informally believe that China and India are allies, believe it or not. So, and plus the positive narrative, because the leadership wants to promote itself as the ones who are enabling the influx of Chinese capital. They use it to score domestic points by promoting themselves as those who are putting a small country like Serbia to be an equal partner with a rising global power like China. And as a result, as you've seen, there are 87% of people who believe that Chinese influence in the country is positive, outmatching even Russia. And of course, the pinnacle of this type of behavior we have seen during March and April, during the COVID-19 state of emergency in Serbia, where Vučić famously discounted the EU's solidarity as a fairy tale and called China the only country that can help us, and referred to Chinese President Xi Jinping as his brother. As a result of this campaign by the ruling parties, who helped Serbia most during the pandemic, 75% believe it is China. And only 3% believe it is the European Union. Now, the European Union has supplied a large number of funds, 93 million euros during that period. With the Chinese, on the other hand, the situation is completely different because everything is done in secretive and non-transparent fashion. All the bilateral intergovernmental contracts with the Chinese are qualified as a state secret or a business confidentiality, however, but it's always the secrecy. So we never know how many of this medical aid was actually donated by China and how many of it was actually purchased by the Serbian government. So this creates this ambiguity and secrecy, which helps the Chinese. So on that front, I can say that now, again, the same problem we will have with Biden. I think that Biden will take notice, just like Trump was also taking notice of the Sino-Serbian cooperation. And that will be one of the points where Serbia will find itself frequently, I think, under the US radar in the Chinese context. However, it will also be very domestically risky to sever his ties with both Russia and China if the public perceives him that he is doing it solely as a result of a pressure from the unpopular US administration. So that creates domestic risks as well, these public opinion polls. And on that point, I want to end and leave it to the other panelists, and we will see afterwards with the Q&A session where this goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vuk, and no doubt we'll have a lot of good discussion on your quite interesting presentation. Let me turn it now, the floor over to Dani Alazi. Dani is also a PhD candidate in politics and international relations at Dublin City University in Ireland. His research is on EU's state building practices, and he's also served in government. He's as Deputy Minister for European Integration, where he was engaged on issues including Kosovo's European reform agenda and the visa liberalization dialogue. Worth noting that Kosovo still doesn't have visa liberalization, although it's been recommended repeatedly by the European Commission. And Dani has also been active in civil society as a founding member of the Kosovo Institute of Peace, among other organizations. Dani, please.
Well, thank you, Edward. So I guess I'll share my presentation as well. Just a second, yeah. Okay. All right, is this working now? I think so. So I will present three key questions from the Kosovo research. How do Kosovars view the influence of other countries on Kosovo? How do Kosovars believe, or who do Kosovars believe helped their country the most in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic? And what do Kosovars think of the European integration process? As Plator already mentioned, this survey was conducted between September and October this year, so quite a fresh perspective. It included over 1,000 households, and it included, in terms of ethnicity, 90% Albanians and 8% Serbs. So the data is not just representing Kosovo Albanian side. So concerning the first question, in this slide you will see how did Kosovar citizens answered on the question of who they think or what kind of influence these countries exercise on Kosovo. And so here I organized the countries in alphabetical order, but organized them into three groups. So the first group represents the neighborhood or the Western Balkans, the second group, the Western countries, and the third group, other countries. So when it comes to the neighborhood or the Western Balkans, I guess to no surprise to anyone, Albania leads the pack. Most Kosovars believe the influence that Albania exercises in the country is positive. Albania is followed by Croatia with 62%. The support or the perception for Croatia can be explained from the position that this country had towards Kosovo. It has significantly and constantly supported Kosovo and international society. But there is also a strong presence of Kosovar community in Croatia, and there is a group of intellectuals from Kosovo who have finished their education in Croatia and maintain close ties. The next country is Montenegro, which is then followed by North Macedonia, and then last on the list we have Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia. Perhaps this results here, what is interesting is that it is counterintuitive in that we see Bosnia being perceived to have a higher negative influence than positive influence. I guess while traditionally Kosovo and Bosnia have had very good relations, there is a very strong Bosnian community in Kosovo. For the new generation in the country, they cannot make a difference between decision-making in Sarajevo and the decision-making in Banja Luka. So I think this has to do a lot with the fact of has to do a lot with the fact of the position of Bosnia vis-a-vis the independence of Kosovo. In the second group of countries, we can see the perceptions of Kosovo about Western countries. And here the absolute lead is for the United States. 86.9% of citizens see the US as having a positive influence in the country. This is followed by Germany. And I guess the support for both US and Germany has to do a lot with as well as for the UK, which is in the third place, has to do a lot with the developments in the 1990s. US has been a staunch supporter of Kosovo, intervention to end the conflict, as well as supporting the aftermath in the state building process, as well as independence. With Germany, there is a strong over 300,000 Kosovars live in Germany. The remittances from Kosovo's diaspora in Germany are a vital lifeline for our economy. Last year, according to Central Bank of Kosovo, over 800 million euros came in remittances to Kosovo, and 40% of those were from Germany. Also for the UK, the support has to do with the developments in the 1990s and its aftermath. UK has been very intimately involved in the state building process. For example, they helped in development of the Kosovo security forces. But recently, we also see that the UK has been very proactive in public diplomacy. For example, the UK ambassador recently visited the Yashari Memorial Complex in Prekas, which was received overwhelmingly positive by Kosovars. France, we see with less of a positive perception among Kosovars. Traditionally, there has been lower positive opinion of France in Kosovo, with the exception of the NATO intervention and the recognition of Kosovo's independence. But most recently, I think most Kosovars see it has become kind of a public secret that it is France and Netherlands who are holding the key to visa liberalization for Kosovo, and I think this is shaping a bit these kind of opinions. In the third category, we see countries or other countries, and here Turkey is seen with the highest positive opinion. We can see also in terms of Saudi Arabia and UAE, the two other relevant countries for Kosovo. Sorry. But we can see what is interesting here is that the positive opinion of Saudi Arabia is less than the negative opinion. In terms of these two countries, UAE was the only non-NATO country to be part of KFOR mission. Also, Saudi Arabia spoke in support of Kosovo at the International Court of Justice. In terms of a negative influence, we can see that the highest negative influence is perceived to come from Russia, followed by China. But what is interesting here is that it seems Kosovars see China as less challenging than Russia. And this is perhaps because China has been less active, or shall we say more subtle, in opposing Kosovo's independence. Concerning the second question on which country had highest positive influence in Kosovo in dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, we can see that most Kosovars believe that Germany has had the highest positive influence, followed by the US and the European Union and Turkey. Of course, this perception is a mismatch with reality. The EU has been the absolute leader in supporting Kosovo. They issued an immediate 5 million euros, for example, for the needs of the Kosovo's main hospital, and they provided additional support in supplies, equipment, and also financial support. But this shows that for the EU, the visa liberalization is the main issue for Kosovars when dealing with the EU, and a lot of what EU does in other issues, I think, is overshadowed by the issue of visa liberalization. Here we can see the views of Kosovars of the European integration process. And again, to no surprise, Kosovars remain extremely optimistic and positive concerning European integration process. 93% support Kosovo's integration. But it becomes more realistic, I guess, when we look at the other question, when do they think Kosovo would become a member state, and also if they think EU really wants Kosovo as a member state. So we can see that only 38% respond without a doubt yes, in terms of if they believe EU wants Kosovo as a member state. And when it comes to the more realistic year for membership, most Kosovars believe that it will be 2030. On the other issue, in terms of what is the most challenging issue for Kosovo in the European integration process, this is interesting results. We can see that corruption and organized crime are seen the biggest issues and not the dialogue or relations with Serbia, which is lower at 17%. And also interestingly enough, most Kosovars, or although it's not a high percentage, but a significant portion, I would say this would mean, of Kosovars believe there has been some progress in resolving bilateral disputes with Serbia. Both these results are counterintuitive, especially they mismatch the reality that is constantly promoted, let's say, by mainstream media, that this is the key issue for Kosovo in European integration process. It tells you that Kosovars are looking more inwards when it comes to problems preventing their integration. However, the issue of corruption, and this is, I think, the most interesting result from my opinion and having worked on this process, we see that although most Kosovars believe corruption is a key issue in the European integration process, when it comes to visa liberalization, they do not see this as being the main reason why Kosovars have not yet liberalized visas with EU. 40% see that this is because some member states of the EU have prejudices against Kosovo, and others think it is a result of discrimination from the EU. I think these data, if there is EU members or people working with EU in the audience, should take note of these important data. I think it has become, it shows that the Kosovar citizens are becoming more aware of the dynamics and complexities of the decision-making process in the EU, and are seeing visa liberalization more as a political process rather than a technical process, which had been from the start. But I think it has transformed in something else. And in conclusion, we can see the top 4 countries that the Kosovars like, and the top 4 countries that Kosovars have a less of a favorable opinion. And I guess the note from here is that we see EU missing, and I think this is an important take from these results. Also, we can see Albania is 3rd. So US and Germany are beating Albania in terms of their perception among Kosovars. So I would end here, and if there is any other questions, I would gladly answer. Thank you, Edward.
Ronnie, thank you very much for that. And I thought it was quite interesting that you also spotted the significance that corruption is perceived as a much more significant obstacle to Kosovo entering the EU than is the standoff with Serbia. I thought that the other one I have to quickly observe is this one about COVID-19, because this just is sort of amazing that the citizens would cite the US above the EU
Yeah.
And Donnie, you will correct me if I'm wrong, the main action of the US, the most significant one of the US, was to create a governance crisis, and to help launch a process that brought down the Kosovo government in the midst of the pandemic. So to me, to say what, and the reaction is that the US did all these great things, while under the Trump administration, it was, I have to simply point that out, that it was, it's quite ironic, given the actual role there. And now let me turn the floor over to our discussant here, and we're very pleased to have Angeluce Morina, who is a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations based in the Berlin office. And Angeluce brings more than 18 years experience in research and fieldwork in the Western Balkans, Euro-Atlantic integration and related issues, including on violent extremism. This is what's interesting. During the negotiations on Kosovo's political status, led by President Marti Ahtisaari, she served as an expert and consultant in the cultural heritage group, their protection of, very important question in Kosovo, of protection of cultural religious heritage. We've heard how this survey shows how strongly and emotionally this is to Serbs, this protection of patrimony to them. And so Angeluce worked on that very topic. She holds degrees from University College London, Oxford University, and the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. Angeluce, please.
Thank you so much, Ed. And yes, I'd like to thank all the presenters. This was such a rich presentation of what they have found on the ground. Really interesting. And I like to agree with you, Ed, that it's really timely, because political dynamics have changed in and around Kosovo and Serbia, and the major change, I think, I would confidently say, has taken place in US, and I think we will see some changes on the ground. I mean, for some, this is good news, is what we heard from also the survey, and for some, it's not such a good news, all these changes. But I like to start where Igor, what Igor mentioned, and the fact that all avenues have been exhausted. Our counterparts, our peers in Kosovo and Serbia, turned to asking the citizens what they think. And I think this is what the citizens have relayed, what they have said. Basically, what we heard today is a very good manifestation of how the process, the dialogue process, but also relations between Kosovo and Serbia, how have they been poorly managed in the past 2 decades. For example, relations between Kosovars and Serbs are really so far apart, 20 years after 99. And you can see this in the survey results of how very few people know each other. They say that about 60% in Kosovo say they don't know any Serb. About 50% in Serbia say they don't know any Kosovars. I mean, this is quite huge, considering how much money have been spent in, let's say, civil society exchanges between the two countries, in political exchanges between the two countries, in all sorts of different exchanges, and also how in close proximity we live next to one another. There's a lot of traveling. For example, there's a lot of traveling in the summer, so you know, people are bound to at least meet one Serb when they travel through Serbia, or meet one Kosovar when they have some doings in Kosovo. But this is not the case. We still sit very far apart from one another. So this is just one indication that peace building, in a way, has failed in the aspects of, I would say, inclusivity in this aspect, because in the bigger processes, inclusivity has been lacking quite a lot. And if I could just say maybe a couple of words on this, on the purely managed dialogue process, I would like to say that the survey also shows there was a huge lack of transparency from the beginning, because, you know, again, this survey is telling us that ordinary people don't know what the process is about. In Kosovo, people constantly believe in majority numbers that this process is about recognition. In Serbia, this is a no-go. the process is not going to deal with recognition. They don't want the process to deal with recognition. And, you know, if asked how would they like to interact with Kosovar Albanians, they really don't seem to be willing to interact. The same goes with for Kosovars, for Kosovar answers as well. So apart from clearly being no transparency, the process was kept very close to the chest of very few people. So the politicians is just a handful group of people have been led into the details of the process, and this shows then really well how the narratives have been controlled constantly by politicians. But the trickle-down effect of the narratives, as we have seen in the survey, is not the only, the politicians are not the only ones to blame. I think here the regress in the media professionalism in recent years and the high media literacy in the region, not just Kosovo and Serbia, plays a huge role in how people form their perceptions about these big processes. I think we have seen in the survey that majority of people get their informations from the TV. And I think I can maybe speak for Kosovo and Serbia. The national TVs, I mean, we know very well that they're, you know, not so professionally controlled. So that's I think another problem that, or also another lessons learned, that if the narrative of the politicians would change for better, and if there would be a higher media professionalism, then we would maybe see some kind of beginning of reconciliation between the two countries. Another point that I wanted to mention that we can maybe draw a lesson from the survey is that clearly there is no readiness to find a solution right now. And I think this goes more towards Serbia and the Serbian leadership rather than the Kosovo leadership. The Kosovo leadership is suffering from a total different kettle of fish of problems, if I could put it like that. But in Serbia, I think we have realized that there is no readiness to come up with a solution, because then Serbia's position in the geopolitical or geostrategic avenue or milieu, as Vuk has very well explained, would change. For example, then the relationship of Serbia and Russia would probably deteriorate, and you know, Russia would also suffer because they would not have a bargaining chip in the Balkans if the Kosovo issue is resolved. This is also helped this situation by a very weak leadership in Kosovo in the last few years. I wouldn't just pick up the 2020, but I think in the last few years, because I think we have realized that because of lack of transparency in the process, but also because of some of the maybe not so public friendly officials who probably were thinking about you know, politics in terms of personal gains, were not really either prepared or were not interested to find a solution or to find a quick solution that would bring about long-lasting peace between the two countries. Maybe one last point, because I know we're running out of time a lot. One last point on the, because the process is also followed with general lack of confidence in the EU processes, and I think here Kosovars stand out, or the views of the Kosovars stand out quite significantly, because I think, in my opinion, is that Kosovars think that they have done everything that EU and international community have asked them to do to date, and I think I would like to bring here the special court. I mean, this was a huge challenge for Kosovars, but it was established anyhow. And the Kosovars have delivered in a way, and there was no positive feedback. There is no positive feedback in sight in the views of Kosovars coming from EU. And of course, we hear a lot about visa liberalization in this front. But in Serbia, the views of EU are somehow diluted because, as Vuk pointed out really well, people are simply not informed. They think that China and Russia are the best friends, and they see EU as someone who's not helping them at all, when in actual fact, figures tells us a completely different story. One element that struck me as really very interesting to kind of that it would also demonstrate how easily publics are manipulated in Serbia, but also Kosovo. But in particular in Serbia here, what I thought was very interesting was the fact that when Serbs were asked who was your enemy, they said Croatia was the first and Albania second. I mean, we all know history here. Serbia never had any serious disputes with Albania as a state. But yet again, in the minds of majority of Serbs, Albania is the second, yes, numbered second is the enemy. I mean, we have seen in recent years actually a bit of a friendship, if I could say, between the president of Serbia and the prime minister of Albania, and they together launched the mini Schengen together with Zaev. But yet again, in the minds and the eyes of Serbs, Albania is the second worst enemy. I mean, I think, yes, there's quite a lot of work to do kind of underneath the surface to understand more where all these opinions are coming from, apart from the narratives being controlled by politicians and the lack of media professionalism. I leave it here because I think there's quite an interesting kind of Q&A session going on here, and I would like to hear more the views of my co-panelists. Thank you so much, Ed, once again.
Thank you, Angelusha. And while making thanks here, I would be remiss for us to leave this event before thanking Marko Drajic of BCSP, who's really been an outstanding partner on organizing this event. And so, Marko, thank you so much. Now, questions, and we are running out of time, and I hope our outstanding colleagues at SAIS will let us go over just a bit, if we may. I want to quickly come back to points that Angelusha raised, and I'm going to come back to Vuk first, Donnie, and forgive me if we don't have time here, but let me quickly come back to Vuk. Vuk, you made an interesting point, which is about the new administration, that the views could change about the US and Serbia because of perceptions and over Kosovo. I call all of our attention to the point that Igor Bandovic made, the director of BCSP, when he opened his opening remarks, where he emphasized how important it is to focus on the democratic process in these countries and not just these security issues, and we know that term stabilocracy. So my question, Vuk, I have two parts here in the moments we have. First, what about Igor's point? And we've seen President-elect Biden's emphasis on the summit of democracies that Brussels has warmly embraced. That is going to bring him into, that's going to bring the administration into a realm that Alexander Vučić does not like. Democracy, talking about the backsliding in Serbian democracy. On the other hand, does that bring the US into alignment with some portion of the Serbian population in that respect? So that's one element. And the other element, Vuk, is this whole question of balance. Angelusha just referred about China. Is balance really the right term for what Serbia is doing? Because it doesn't seem to be much of a balance. It seems to be a controlled narrative in Belgrade by the government of high praise for China, and I would say still quite a bit of warmth and expression, affection towards Russia, and to the extent where we see that in the public mind, the EU contribution on COVID is not related. So I wonder about this term balance, and I wonder particularly in the context of this relationship with Russia, because my specific question is this really serious that Vučić has to worry about, quote, pro-Russian influences around him, or is this actually just a convenient narrative to sell to the West? And really the basic point comes is, does he have an interest to resolve this Kosovo question? That's my question for you. And there's several reasons to suggest that perhaps he doesn't, but Vuk, please take the floor.
Thanks, Ed. Well, I mean, you have raised a couple of points. Now, I mean, there is a very big correlation between the state of democracy and the Serbian Kosovo policy. I mean, one of the reasons, I mean, you've mentioned this concept, stabilitocracy. I mean, it has been repeated so many times over the years, and to the point that it has almost become a cliche, but actually it is still true, despite the fact that sometimes the concepts tend to wear off, but it is still true. I mean, one of the reasons why Vučić has been able to receive acquiescence from both the Europeans and Washington on the illiberal trends in Serbia has been the idea that he sold the idea that he is the only one who can resolve the Kosovo dispute. And of course, everything else, his cooperativeness on migration has also been added to that rubric. However, I mean, as I've mentioned in some of the other panels where we participated, I think that part of him is very tempted to do a lot of foot dragging on Kosovo in order to avoid selling the final settlement to his constituents. Part of him is very tempted to do the foot dragging and to prolong the final resolution. However, he's also stretched on the other hand on the other hand, there is the West, whose support he actually needs in order to stay in power. So he is stressed between his own domestic hurdles and great powers on whose support he relies. So he is biding time in hope that in the end something will happen, that someone in the West will give him a less painful settlement, the one that he hopes he will be able to sell to his domestic audience. And you're absolutely right. Even with concessions from the West, it will still be a very tough sell for him. But without any concessions, that is a no-go for him. So on that front, that summit of democracy idea, I mean, how far will Biden administration pressure Vučić over illiberal trends? Well, we will have to wait and see. Perhaps Biden administration decides to give him some time on Kosovo issue as well. I mean, we have seen that Obama administration was there when Vučić was in power, and Biden as a vice president met Vučić twice when he was the prime minister in 2015, 2016. So that we will still have to wait and see whether, because of the Kosovo issue, whether that democracy criteria will become a factor in US-Serbian relation. And as far as the balance goes, when I say balance, I usually refer to balancing act in a foreign policy term, not in terms of balance in domestic public opinion divisions, so to speak. But I think that Vučić is a smart man. He can read the geographical map, he can read the numbers, he can read the trade exchange, with whom do we trade, he can see with whom we conduct, who is on our borders, with whom we do most military drills. But I think that his overtures and his play with Russia and China, they are more tactical balancing. We have seen this in December 2019. Serbia said that it will no longer be purchasing weaponry from Russia when it was faced with the threat of US financial sanctions. So this balancing is basically tactical opportunism, which is being pursued as long as Serbia is not paying a high price for it. The moment the terrain becomes too hot, they back down. I mean, in 2018, Serbia also had a visa-free regime with Iran, and it had direct flights around Belgrade. It gave up after it was pressured by the EU, which threatened its visa-free regime. So every time Serbia gives up when the terrain becomes too hot. The only challenge for Serbian leadership is not the international one. The reason why we have this public opinion poll is simple as this. It's the one that domestically sells. So I mean, on one point, Vučić can decide to scale back on his cooperation with Russia and China if it's become geopolitically too hot for him. But at the same time, he will always do it in a way which doesn't cause any public opinion backlash at home.
Thank you very much for that, Vuk. And I think it's just worth pointing out here on that balance question that there's an asymmetry there between Western approach, the relations with the US and the EU and China and Russia, that it's not just four different constellations that are equal. And for Vučić, of course, it goes back to this question that Igor raised about democracy. China and Russia don't ask questions about rule of law. China and Russia don't ask questions about corruption. China and Russia don't ask questions about labeling political opponents and journalists, enemy of the people, freedom in the media, and associates. So fundamentally, again, the concept of balance, I wonder about, and I wonder about that final calculus there in Belgrade. We are out of time now. We've gone over 5 minutes. And again, my thanks to SAIS for allowing us, SAIS events, their great work, and for allowing us to go over. I want to thank all of these panelists. Donnie, let me quickly say, I didn't give you a chance. Do you have anything burning you want to say, or may we close? I should at least offer you the floor. You're good? All right.
Not my call. I mean, I always have something burning to say, but it's...
But if there's anything that any of the other ones said that you feel deserves a response.
Just, I think, to point out, when it comes to Biden, let's not forget that it was the first highest official from the US to visit Belgrade and to say that on Kosovo, we can agree to disagree. So, you know, let's see how that plays out, if Kosovo remains just an issue at the bureaucratic level at the State Department, or it is really meaningful engagement to move forward.
Thank you for adding that, Donnie. And I want to thank you. I want to thank Vuk, and I want to thank Angeluce as well. All of our panelists here. I think this has been a terrific discussion. Again, it's, I think, a wonderful thing that you all are leading your own surveys, not us and organizations here in the US that are running around conducting these surveys, but that you are designing your own surveys, analyzing them yourselves, and then coming together here jointly to share and to illuminate all of us who care about the region and want to see Serbia and Kosovo progress and have a positive and peaceful relationship, and recognize each other in all meanings of that term, not just diplomatically, but as human beings. So for me here at Johns Hopkins SAIS, Edward Joseph, I want to thank all of you for your participation, and thank those of you who joined us on the screen. Have a good day.